July 1968. Harlem wept, but in the humid air a different kind of tension hung thick, the unspoken hum of ambition. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, the legendary godfather, was being laid to rest. His empire, built on shrewd deals and an unwritten code, was now an open wound, a power vacuum waiting to be filled. Among the mourners, sharp in a custom suit that spoke of rising fortunes, stood Frank Lucas. His gaze, fixed not on the grave but on the shifting landscape around it, held a flicker of cold, calculating certainty. For Lucas, this wasn't an end. It was the grand opening. The king was dead, he thought, a silent, audacious pronouncement of his own ascension. His vision, a heroin operation, pure, uncut, poised to rake in $1 million a week, shattering every old rule. What he failed to see, what no one in that crowded, grief-stricken cemetery truly understood, was the long, intricate shadow of the man they were burying. A shadow that had already cast its judgment, already set the stage for a game Lucas didn't even know he was playing. This wasn't just a funeral, it was the quiet beginning of a strategic masterpiece, a chess match played across time, where the board was Harlem itself. The pieces were already moving, even as the dirt fell. Frank Lucas believed he was a lion, ready to pounce on the carcass of a bygone era. But Bumpy, according to the whispers that always carried more weight than shouts in Harlem, had always seen him as a cub who needed to learn the hard way. And Bumpy, even in death, was prepared to be his toughest teacher. Harlem in the late 60s was a crucible. It was a place where power wasn't just taken, it was earned, often with a blend of brute force and delicate diplomacy. For decades, Bumpy Johnson had been the architect of this fragile balance. His operations were diversified, numbers, protection, even a hand in legitimate businesses, all woven into the community's fabric. He maintained a cautious peace with the Italian families, understanding that certain lines, while invisible, were never to be crossed. Bumpy's power wasn't just about the muscle he commanded, it was about respect, about order, about a certain unwritten code that, for all its ruthlessness, kept the streets from dissolving into total chaos. His most prized possession, an intricately carved wooden chess set, often seen on a polished table in his home, wasn't just a hobby. It was a symbol of his mind, his relentless strategic planning, his ability to think 10 steps ahead, to play the long game. After Bumpy's passing, the set was carefully put away, a silent sentinel watching. Frank Lucas, however, saw sentimentality where Bumpy saw strategy. He dismissed the old ways as obsolete, a weakness in a world ripe for disruption. He believed pure business acumen, ruthless efficiency, and an unshakable will to dominate could trump decades of tradition and loyalty. Lucas was a force, undeniable and formidable. His ambition burned with an almost messianic zeal. He wouldn't just step into Bumpy's shoes, he would stomp all over them, forging his own path, a path paved with pure, uncut heroin imported directly from Southeast Asia. This wasn't just a new drug, it was a new, brutal paradigm. It bypassed the Italian mob's traditional supply lines, flooded the streets with a cheaper, more potent product, and fundamentally challenged the established order. This wasn't just about making money, it was about a seismic shift in power dynamics, a direct challenge to the definition of respect, and a blatant disregard for the community's well-being that Bumpy, for all his ruthlessness, understood as a dangerous, unforgivable line. At the heart of Bumpy's lingering influence stood Pops Dixon. An aging, quiet man, Pops had been Bumpy's most trusted driver and confidant for decades. He was Bumpy's shadow, seeing everything, hearing everything, and understanding Bumpy's strategic mind better than anyone. Pops was a silent sentinel of the old guard, loyal to Bumpy's memory and, more importantly, to the code Bumpy lived and died by. His quiet nature was his strength, his danger. He rarely spoke, never interfered directly, but he observed, and when the time was right, he acted. Pops held the keys to Bumpy's final intentions, and his quiet disapproval carried more weight than any direct threat. He was the living embodiment of Bumpy's legacy, the quiet guardian of the game Bumpy was still playing. In the months that followed Bumpy's funeral, Frank Lucas moved with the predatory grace of a man seizing his moment. He consolidated his power with breathtaking speed, establishing his notorious country boys network. The heroin flowed pure and potent, straight from the Golden Triangle, bypassing every traditional channel. The money poured in, unprecedented sums that Lucas flaunted with an almost childish glee. He bought up properties across Harlem, his fingers heavy with diamond rings, his presence growing larger, more audacious. He openly challenged the Genovese family's authority, a move Bumpy would have approached with extreme caution, if at all. Lucas saw himself as untouchable, a self-made king who had finally escaped the shadow of his mentor. The quiet warnings from old-timers, the subtle glances, the hushed conversations, Lucas dismissed them all. Pops Dixon, with his usual understated presence, once tried to remind him of Bumpy's principles. "Bumpy always said," Pops murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, "the biggest mistake a man can make is to forget where he came from and who he owes." Lucas merely laughed it off, a dismissive wave of his hand. The past was dead, he believed, a relic of a bygone era, irrelevant in his shiny new world. He had escaped it, or so he thought. His arrogance swelled, culminating in a bold public move that reverberated through every corner of Harlem. He didn't just expand, he swallowed. Lucas took over a key territory, a numbers operation Bumpy had protected for decades, a territory where a silent agreement, a delicate balance had been maintained, with both a respected community elder and even, subtly, with an Italian capo. It was a brazen act of disrespect, a clear signal that the old ways were not just gone, but actively scorned. For Lucas, it was a triumph, a declaration of his absolute dominion. He stood tall, believing he had won. But this was precisely where Bumpy's long game began to activate, not with a bang, but with a series of almost imperceptible movements, like pieces shifting on a hidden board. Pops Dixon, witnessing Lucas's blatant disregard for the delicate equilibrium Bumpy had so carefully maintained, began his quiet work. He wasn't plotting an overthrow, not yet. He simply made a series of visits. He spoke to old associates of Bumpy, men who remembered the code, who understood the intricate web of loyalties. He shared conversations with community elders, whose respect Bumpy had earned over decades. And then he paid a visit to a specific, seemingly insignificant police contact Bumpy had cultivated for decades, a man whose loyalty to Bumpy, born of a shared understanding of Harlem's complex ecosystem, ran deeper than any badge. Pops didn't betray Lucas in any overt way. He simply reminded them subtly of Bumpy's vision for Harlem, of the order he'd upheld and of the chaos Lucas was now unleashing. He reminded them of the game and the rules. Lucas, blinded by his own burgeoning empire, made his most critical miscalculation. He trusted a new ambitious lieutenant, a young man sharp and eager, who Lucas believed was utterly loyal to him. What Lucas didn't know, what he couldn't see, was that this lieutenant held a deep, almost filial loyalty to Pops Dixon, and through Pops, to Bumpy's memory and his code. This lieutenant, swayed by Pops's quiet conviction, by the silent weight of Bumpy's legacy, began to feed subtle, almost imperceptible information. Tiny details, seemingly innocuous, slipped into the ether. They weren't direct betrayals, not yet, but rather the quiet repositioning of pawns, setting the stage for a checkmate Lucas never saw coming. The error wasn't a single act, but Lucas's consistent failure to understand the invisible web of loyalty and respect Bumpy had so painstakingly woven across Harlem, a web that was now, piece by quiet piece, beginning to tighten around him. Frank Lucas, riding high on his tidal wave of pure heroin and easy money, felt untouchable. But the ground beneath him was subtly, imperceptibly beginning to shift. The trap Bumpy had set years before was not a violent ambush, but a slow, public unraveling. It started with whispers, then became a hum, and finally a roar that Lucas, in his arrogance, was too deafened by his own success to hear. The first signs were small, almost negligible. A shipment delayed, then another. A key contact in Vietnam suddenly became unreachable. Lucas barked orders, made threats, but the efficiency that had been his hallmark began to fray. He attributed it to bad luck, to the sheer scale of his operation, never to the quiet, almost invisible hand of Pops Dixon, nudging the pieces on Bumpy's unseen chessboard. Pops, through his deep network of loyalty, subtly reminded Bumpy's old associates of the code, of the chaos Lucas was inviting. He didn't ask them to betray Lucas, he simply asked them to remember Bumpy, to remember what true respect meant. Then came the arrests, not of Lucas himself, not yet, but of his country boys' lieutenants. One by one, picked off in meticulously planned raids across the city. The police, it seemed, suddenly had an uncanny understanding of Lucas's logistics, his meeting spots, his distribution routes. This wasn't random. This was the specific, actionable intelligence Bumpy Johnson had cultivated over decades, a ledger of favors, a network of strategically placed contacts, a pattern of activities subtly documented to maintain leverage, all of it now being quietly accessed, almost posthumously by Pops. Bumpy's foresight wasn't just about dealing with the present, it was about controlling the future, even from the grave. He knew the lines he couldn't cross, and he knew how to ensure those who did would eventually pay. Lucas raged, but he couldn't pinpoint the leak. He suspected betrayal, of course, but his new ambitious lieutenant, the one secretly loyal to Pops, remained above suspicion, meticulously feeding Lucas just enough information to keep his paranoia focused on external threats, away from the true source. The ground continued to give way. The old guard, quietly nudged by Pops, began to distance themselves. Invitations to exclusive Harlem social clubs, once freely extended, now ceased. His calls went unanswered. The Italian families, who Bumpy had always treated with a wary respect, now saw Lucas as a liability, an arrogant upstart who had broken every rule. They didn't need to declare war, they simply needed to withhold their silent approval, and Lucas's foundations began to crumble. His supply chain, once so invulnerable, became compromised through a series of unfortunate events and sudden, inexplicable betrayals. Warehouses were raided, not by rival gangs, but by federal agents armed with precise coordinates. Cash stashes disappeared, not into the pockets of street thieves but into evidence lockers. Lucas found his allies turning away, his sources drying up, not because of a direct threat but because his reputation, built solely on disrespect and pure profit, had become a cancerous liability. He was losing control, not in a hail of bullets, but in a slow, agonizing suffocation of his empire. The untouchable king was suddenly very, very vulnerable. The climax arrived not with a shootout, but with a public, humiliating exposure of Frank Lucas's vulnerability. His country boys network, the very backbone of his audacious operation, was systematically dismantled. It wasn't a rival gang's bullets that brought them down, but a series of high-profile arrests that made front-page news, massive asset seizures that crippled his finances, and the quiet, collective withdrawal of key players who decided Lucas simply wasn't worth the trouble. His empire, built on speed and ruthlessness, lacked the deep roots of loyalty and respect that Bumpy's had cultivated. The final devastating blow came not from a judge's gavel, but from the community itself. It was a crisp autumn evening, November 1972. Lucas had called a meeting at a Harlem social club, one Bumpy himself had frequented for decades. He expected support, a rallying cry from his remaining loyalists. The room was packed, but the air was heavy, thick with a silence that spoke volumes. Faces, once eager to nod approval, now held a grim, almost pitying resolve. Lucas began to speak, his voice booming, trying to project strength, but the words felt hollow. He spoke of new opportunities, of fighting back, but no one moved, no one cheered. Then, Pops Dixon entered the room. He walked slowly, deliberately, his presence quiet but commanding. He didn't utter a single word. He simply walked directly to the head of the long, polished table where Frank Lucas stood, his hand still resting on a stack of worthless papers. Pops reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small, intricately carved object, and with a soft click that resonated in the deafening silence of the room, he placed a single black chess pawn from Bumpy's treasured set onto the table directly in front of Lucas. Pops's eyes, ancient and knowing, met Lucas's for a long, silent moment. Then, without another glance, without a sound, he turned and walked out of the room. The silence that followed was deafening, a collective judgment more potent than any threat, any bullet. Lucas stared at the pawn, a dark, insignificant piece of wood, and in that moment he understood. He wasn't the king. He was merely a pawn, moved, outmaneuvered, and sacrificed in a game far older and more complex than he had ever comprehended. A game Bumpy Johnson had already won, long before he was laid to rest. He hadn't escaped the past. He had been played by it. In the weeks that followed that humiliating night, the heroin trade in Harlem didn't disappear entirely, but it fragmented. Lucas's direct Golden Triangle pipeline was severed, utterly broken. The sheer volume of pure, cheap heroin vanished from the streets, forcing a return to more traditional, less efficient and ultimately far less profitable distribution methods through the Italian families, at least for a time. Within 6 months, many of Lucas's former lieutenants were either arrested or simply disappeared, their ambition now tempered, if not extinguished, by the public brutal lesson of Lucas's fall. The city reacted with a mixture of relief and a grim, knowing understanding. The streets had been cleaned not by a new king asserting his dominance, but by the lingering shadow of the old one. The message was clear, etched into the very asphalt of Harlem. Disrespect the code, disrespect the community, and even death won't save you from the consequences. Frank Lucas learned too late that true power isn't about how much you take or how fast you rise. It's about how much you control. No, and that control is built on far more than just fear and money. It's built on a legacy, on respect, on an invisible web of loyalties, and on the quiet understanding that some games are played over decades, not days. Bumpy Johnson didn't need to be alive to win. He simply let time do the talking, letting the seeds he had planted years before blossom into Lucas's undoing. The question then becomes, is it better to be the king who burns bright and fast, leaving nothing but scorched earth in his wake, or the legend whose influence outlives his reign, shaping the very soul of the streets long after his grave is cold? In Harlem, at least, the answer was clear. The shadow of Bumpy Johnson, the quiet wisdom of Pops Dixon, and the cold, silent judgment of a single black chess pawn proved that some battles are won not with bullets, but with foresight, and with the enduring power of a code that could never truly be buried. If this unseen chess match played by a ghost caught your attention, then hit that like button. Seriously, what are you waiting for? Subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments below, was Lucas a victim of his own hubris, or was Bumpy's posthumous revenge justified? Share this story with someone who thinks they know how power works. You might just change their entire perspective. And next time, we dive even deeper into the hidden histories of the underworld with a tale so twisted it'll make this one look like a walk in the park. You won't want to miss it.